episode of What Are You Reading? If you were with me last week, you know that we read one of my favorite plays, Fences, and talked about the different characteristics and struggles and hardships that a typical African American family endured during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. But this week we're going to change it up a little bit and move on to another family in a novel, and we will be reading How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent by Julia Alvarez. This is a amazing classic novel that talks about the experiences, adventures, hardships, all of the above for the four Garcia sisters, how they moved from the Dominican Republic into the United States and their experiences in both countries. We see a lot of setting, narrative arcs, and different themes throughout the book that show which one do they prefer more, the United States or the Dominican Republic. And our question that we will eventually have answered is, how did the Garcia girls lose their accent? Before getting into anything else, I would really like to take a moment and talk about our author, Julia Alvarez. She was born in New York City, but only after a couple of years, her parents failed there and did not have a great experience, so they decided to move back to their native land, the Dominican Republic, to connect back to their roots, their homeland, and they also preferred the dictatorship that was there. It was Trujillo versus what was going on in the United States of the early 50s. Once again, her father got involved in some bad things, got involved into the underground, and they soon fell in deep trouble and had to move back to the United States in the 1960s. Now, the author did not have the best time going back to the United States. She'd been back in the Dominican Republic for a long time, and from going back to the U.S., her English wasn't as strong as it used to be, and her classmates began to make fun of her. They called her barbaric and a yop because of her Dominican Republic dialect and accent. And part of that, of her experience, gave her the inspiration to write How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent. Just like she did, the girls experience the hardship and the reality that the United States has, and and it gives them the question of what do they prefer to live in, their homeland of the Dominican Republic, where they would probably feel more comfortable and they have the most family and love there, or would they want to try something new and adventurous like going to the United States. Something that is very important about the book, or any book in general, is the setting, where it takes place. So in this book, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent, the setting is either taking place in the United States, or the Dominican Republic. Just wanted to make a quick note. After a while, I will shorten Dominican Republic to the DR and the United States to the US. You should understand why. I'm already starting to mumble up my words. But like I was saying, setting is very important. It's either taking place in the DR or the US. And also something that's very interesting about this book is that it's written in reverse chronological order, which means it starts from the present and it moves to the past. With the past, it explains how everything started in the Dominican Republic, where they got their language and their background, and how they got to where they are now. But the present depicts how the girls currently are based on their past actions, whether they were in the United States or the Dominican Republic when this happened. Some narrative arcs that we see is a comparison with the new and the old generation. With the new generation versus the old generation, there's a conflict and differences in whether traditions should be upheld or whether they should be lost. The older generation, of course, believe that traditions need to be stuck to. They cannot be changed. You have to go by them. Whereas the newer generation feels like some things can be changed because as the years go on, the world is changing. Traditions aren't ever going to stay the same. So, for example, about the new generation, example for clothing, on page 3 it says, quote, "The cousins are flashes of color in turquoise jumpsuits and tight jersey dresses." I'm going to reference my book. Whereas also on page 3, it says, quote, about the older generation, "The old aunts lounge in the white wicker armchairs, flipping open their fans and snapping them shut. The more of them are dressed in the grays and blacks of widowhood." So we see, of course, the older generation is sticking to more of, if they are a widow or not, they are in the blacks and the grays, whereas the younger generation are wearing the bright turquoise colors. One of our main characters, Yolanda, who is one of the Garcia sisters, goes through something very similar when she would like to go pick guavas from being back in the Dominican Republic. She is told that she shouldn't probably go by herself because in this country, the Dominican Republic, they don't do that sort of thing. They have to wait for the man to come home or just go with more people, whereas she would have more independence into the United States. For example, on page 9, Yolanda expresses, quote, "I can't wait to eat some guavas. Maybe I can pick some when I go north in a few days." By herself? Tia Carmen shakes her head at the mere thought. "This is not the States," Tia Flor says, with a knowing smile. "A woman just doesn't travel alone in this country, especially these days." So right there, of course, we see what some people expect of her versus others, whether they're in the DR or these. Now, finally, we will move on to the Garcia family. The Garcia family is a close relative to the De La Torre family because their mother, Laura, is the daughter of Papito and Mamita De La Torre. There are 33 other known Garcia family members, but we only get an introduction to 6 of them, and that is the mother and father, Carlos and Laura, and their 4 daughters, in this order: Carla, Sandra, Yolanda, and Sofia. Carla and Sandra, being the oldest, have the most memories of the Dominican Republic, whereas Yolanda and Sofia have the most memories of the United States. Yolanda is kind of an exception, though, because she is the 3rd oldest and the 2nd youngest. We get most of our information from her throughout this book. She has experiences from both the Dominican Republic and the United States. Their parents decide to go to the United States for new experiences and adventures, and since then the girls decide on their own as they become young adults whether they want to stay in the Dominican Republic or the United States. Some other family members that we are introduced to are Tio Orlando and Tia Fidelina, and also Manuel Gustavo, and that is from the Garcia family. From the De La Torre family, we meet Tio Mundo, who's married to Tia Carmen. We meet Tio Arturo, who's married to Tia Flor, Tia Isa, Tia Mimi, and Lucinda, Mundin, and Camasita. I'm referencing right now the very handy, not timeline, but family tree that comes in the book. So let's just jump into the characterization of the 4 Garcia sisters. The first character we're going to be discussing is Yolanda. Like I said earlier, Yolanda is the 3rd oldest and the 2nd youngest, so she's about in the middle, and she is seen as one of the main characters. She's neither the antagonist or the protagonist, but is sometimes seen as the storyteller. Despite her being from the Dominican Republic, she has traveled a lot to the United States, and because of her constant traveling, she's had a hard time connecting back to her roots, her culture, and even her language. Because of some experience that happened in the United States, she had a mental breakdown and she lost her inability to use language in a meaningful and purposeful way. This is very hard on her because she is a poet and a writer, and being a poet, language is a very important. That is her life. And it was a very traumatic experience for her because of how important language is. And because of her experience, that created her internal conflict. She loses the connection with her language. And she constantly has to go back and forth from using English to Spanish, which also contributes to her loss of language. And that's very, very, very hard on her as a poet. She loses the purpose of language and how to write. Through her poetry, she learned how to express herself, and she learned more about the people around her, so now she's in this state of confusion and frustration. Like I stated earlier, with the narrative arc and the setting, she learned the difference between how women are expected to live their lives and expected to act, whether they are in the DR or the United States. And other than losing language in a purposeful way, she loses some of her Spanish. For example, she's having a conversation with her aunts, and one of them says in a sentence the word entoyo, and she forgets what it says. On page 8, she says, quote, "What's an entoyo?" Yolanda asks. See, her aunts are right. After so many years away, she's losing her Spanish. Also on page 8, it says, quote, "In halting Spanish, Yolanda reports on her sisters. When she reverts to English, she is scolded in Espanol. The more she practices, the sooner she'll be back into her native tongue," the aunts insist. After her doing this with her Spanish, like forgetting some of the words, her aunts become a little bit concerned that she is even more losing some of her culture, her history, and of course her language. The next sister we will be discussing is Sophia, also known as Fifi. Sophia is the youngest out of the Garcia sisters, and she has the least amount of memories from the Dominican Republic. All that she can remember is their housemaid, the Haitian maid who was Chucha, and how she did some of the voodoo spells. So like I just said, she was the youngest, and because of it, she was your stereotypical rebel. She did everything she wasn't supposed to do. She was known for her nonstop boyfriends and how beautiful she was, and was always in a relationship. Her internal conflict was created with tension between her and her father. When she was not necessarily a teenager, but I'll just say a young adult, she went to the United States, just like some of her sisters did, and met a man there named Otto, I think that's how you pronounce it, who was German and did not speak any English, barely any English, and of course no Spanish. They fell in love, ran away together, and had a child. After finding this out, her father was very, very upset and disappointed with her and her actions. They went through a period of not talking to each other because of just how mad he was with her. But after she had her child and came back to the Dominican Republic for them to meet, some of that tension eased a little bit, but there was always that bit of awkwardness between them because of what she did do. Now you might be wondering, why is it such a big deal that she just got married and had a child? Now for some of us, it doesn't seem like a big deal because she was doing what she does best, what any teenager would probably do, or a young adult, get married and have a child. But there was the most tension was because, 1, she ran away, 2, she got married, and 3, he wasn't even of the same race or culture as her. He was German and didn't even speak the same language as her. But like I said earlier, some of the tension was eased because of her child. The child acted as the glue between her and her father, and things are beginning to look up. Okay, so this is the end of video 1. This is part 1 of the 2-part videos about how the Garcia girls lost their accent. So to get more analysis on the last 2 characters that we're going to talk about, and then our different questions, themes, conflicts, and more like that, just make sure you keep watching and click on the next video. So yeah, thanks for joining me on part 1. See you guys in part 2.